The Prime Minister delivered a speech today that in many ways serves as a eulogy for the rules-based world order, an order that Canada and its allies have relied on since the end of the Second World War. On stage at the World Economic Forum, Mark Carney had a warning that world leaders must adjust to this new reality or suffer. It was also a call to action to middle powers to diversify and seek new, reliable partners. And whether by coincidence or by design, this speech happened on the one-year anniversary of U.S. President Donald Trump's second inauguration.
Every day, we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination. The middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. The powerful have their power. But we have something too. The capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, to build our strength at home, and to act together.
The Prime Minister gave that speech in the hours after the U.S. President shared this on social media. This is an altered picture from a meeting with European leaders last year at the Oval Office, and beside Trump, an edited map that has an American flag covering Greenland and Canada. And it's those kinds of threats that have prompted stories like this in the Globe and Mail. The headline, Military Models Canadian Response to Hypothetical American Invasion. It's one of those days. Good thing the power panel is here. We've got Vandana Cotter. She was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. We're just connecting with her right now. Nathan Cullen is a former NDP MP and a BC NDP minister. And Emily Nicola is a columnist for Le Devoir. Okay, Vandana, it was quite the speech by Prime Minister Carney today. Peter Beam, the senator, a former GAC official, was on the show earlier, said maybe the most consequential since Louis Saint Laurent in 1947. I mean, what do you make of what we heard from Mark Carney today on the world stage?
He didn't mince words, and he was confirming exactly what many of us have been talking about, that the system has changed, the international system has changed, how we viewpoint things like NATO, our traditional allies, all that has changed, and not just for now, but perhaps generationally. And he talked about what countries need to do. There was a call to action to middle countries that we cannot take this moment to not name what's happening and to hide within ourselves, but to take action right now. So it was very honest and very blunt, a very realpolitik view, but nothing surprising to me, but except for the fact that this is definitely a new direction of what world leaders are talking about, and he was very blunt about it.
Nathan, when you're quoting Thucydides, it is rarely the sign that it's going to be a happy speech, because the history of the Peloponnesian War is not really a feel-good story. But the Prime Minister is speaking in pretty stark terms about what happens when great powers are unchecked and unbalanced by counterweights, and it seems to be a call to action of the middle powers to come together and to be that counterweight to the great powers as best they can. What did you make of what we heard today?
Well, first I'm going to pretend like I read that great Greek philosopher. And to sum up, it was multilateralism is dead. Long live multilateralism. That the institutions that we've relied on, the rules that underlie those institutions about fairness, etc., are being rapidly ignored, and so we can't count on them. And the way to counter that, especially as middle powers like Canada and Denmark and Australia, et cetera, down the line, is to spend a lot of time together and spread out our bets. Not all have our bets, especially as a Canadian economy, into the hands of the Americans. I think this point about whether this is a Trump moment or this is something that is shifting generationally for Americans, that this is the new America for at least the mid-long foreseeable future, that was most curious to me, because it assumes that even if Trump loses the House, or if Trump is not the president next time around, which we're expecting, and a Democrat is, that this will still be the reality that Canada faces, a very aggressive. And I got to be honest, I'm finding that part of the theory a little hard to stomach. I think a lot of this is associated to Trump's particular chemistry and his ability to dominate the Congress and his own party, et cetera. And I maybe I'm just hopeful that the American resilience and resistance to authoritarianism runs a little bit deeper than the speech suggested today.
I'd like to share your hope, Nathan, but I wonder, right? Like when you look at what's happening on the streets of Minnesota, you know,
I know.
To the geopolitical disruption. I mean, Lisa, the use of the word rupture by the Prime Minister suggests he sees this as a permanent state of like a demarcation, that everything is different from this point on. And even if it does, I guess, slingshot back to something approaching what we consider normal, you got to prepare for the worst in a moment like this, is kind of the message. How do you think it's going to land with the European leaders and the business elite at a place like Davos?
Well, those two groups, I think, are going to appreciate it, and they're going to like it. It's a really smart speech. I mean, I'm so glad you pronounced the philosopher's name, because
Well, he was a historian, by the way.
Didn't have a clue.
He's a former general who served, he was an Athenian general, and he wrote about the history of the Peloponnesian War. I did a lot of classics as an undergraduate, so that's how I know that stuff. So there you go, Lisa.
Which is paying off.
No, I appreciate that. I had no clue what he was talking about there, but the theme of the speech I fully understand, and I understand why it's important for him to get out there and say that. I guess my big issue, though, David, is yes, it's meant for the elites. Yes, it's meant for the middle powers to rally them, but there's two more audiences. How is Mr. Trump going to deal with this? And what do the Canadian public think about the risk that we're taking when we take such a stance? And it's okay. I'm not afraid of the risk, but I just want to make sure that the Prime Minister equally explains in painstaking detail the risk that we're facing as a nation when a speech like that is taken. So I'd like to see a little bit more from him.
Yeah, well, Emily, it's one of these things. You give a speech, there's a risk. You don't give a speech, you're still going to suffer risk. I mean, Greenland didn't give a speech. Denmark didn't give a speech. And look where they are. I'm just wondering, Emily, what are your thoughts on what we heard from the Prime Minister today in laying this out?
I'm considering his speech in the European context. I think it's the World Economic Forum, but I think he was mostly assuming a European crowd when he wrote that speech, or a Western crowd when he wrote that speech. It seems to be a call for Canada to get closer to their European allies, because he was so insistent on the vocabulary that is basically so dear to liberal democracies. One of the other things that is in the background of the speech is basically appeasement, and the way in which it bit the Prime Minister of the UK in the bottom in the last days, but also historically when it was Germany rising as a power during the 1930s. And I think it's that the failure of appeasement when you have when you have somebody who wants to essentially annex neighbors and invade neighbors and just grow and become more and more large within Europe or within the Western world. This is basically what we're facing right now. And I think what Mark Carney is saying is that we need to basically essentially unite around it. I'm still hungry for what Mark Carney's vision is behind this, because once again, this is a very Eurocentric views, and it has a lot of holes still on Venezuela, on what we're going to be doing about the so-called, oxymoronically called Peace Council in Gaza, and whether or not we're going to be wanting to be complicit with that. And so there's a lot of questions still out there when it comes to that invisible line between the Western and the non-Western world, and whether we think it's okay for the rule of law to not exist there. But I think it was smart for Mark Carney to make that speech at Davos and trying to basically call on Western leaders to have a little bit of a spine and not repeat the errors of the 1930s.
Yeah, I mean, the Prime Minister in the Q&A, I believe, afterwards did talk about his trade ideas, including Mercosur, the Pacific Rim, you know, and other countries outside of Europe. But on the appeasement thing, I mean, you know, Vandana, I keep thinking about You know, the UK shows up with the offer of a second state visit and accept a 10% tariff. Europe agrees to a bunch of things and accepts this kind of a tariff. The endless string of gifts going to the White House to get deals that have now been completely nuked by the 10% February 1 tariff and the 25% June tariff if you don't give them Greenland, right? So like the Prime Minister basically kind of said, this is how you deal with it. Don't buckle.
Yeah, and I think he knows that Donald Trump is expecting everyone to blink and appease and like, let's give a little bit more, let's give a little bit more. And his call out is that this is how the international system has worked for a long time. And we have to be honest with how it's the good things about it, but also the things that aren't great about it. The fact that there is appeasement, and we have to think through who our allies are, and then even some of our allies aren't upholding human rights. And we talked about our neighbor down south. So I think he's being real with that, but also this is not someone from the outside who has never worked in these systems, calling it out, saying they don't work. This is someone who's worked at the UN and in a number of international institutions to try to bring change. And he's saying, you know, we need to make this happen. Because this is on forever. And I think his challenge to the audience he has, which is like business leaders and European leaders, is stop doing that. And we have to stand together. And the more we try to stand apart or build our own fortresses, the worse it'll be for all of us. It'll actually be more expensive and less sustainable. So I think that's his key point there.
We may see how the U.S. president feels about it tomorrow when he arrives in Davos, but some of his proxies, his cabinet secretaries, they were there today. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spoke on panels, and their comments a stark contrast against those of European leaders pushing back against U.S. tariff threats. Have a listen to this.
The Western Hemisphere matters to the United States of America. And the United States of America, as I've just articulated, really, really matters to the world.
We need more stability in this world, but we do prefer respect to bullies, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
I tell everyone, sit back, take a deep breath, do not retaliate, do not retaliate.
We consider the people of the United States not just our allies, but our friends. And plunging us into a downward spiral would only aid the very adversaries we are both so committed to keeping out of the strategic landscape. So our response will be unflinching, united, and proportional.
Okay, Nathan Cullen, just to point out to people, by the way, Emmanuel Macron wearing sunglasses because he has an eye infection. He's not trying to be Tom Cruise at Davos. What do you make of what we heard there, basically from Lutnick and Bessent is, don't you dare, is kind of what the subtext of everything they say is.
This is the bullies standing over you while punching you in the face saying, don't fight back, don't call the teacher. Like, it's not going to do you any good. This is the ultimate threat of somebody who only knows one way of doing business, which is we're just going to keep hurting you and you're going to try to appease us and it's not going to work. And then we're going to hurt you some more. That understand what all those tariffs that you talked about, David, are coming is simply by Europe saying you can't forcibly take a country, an independent country, a sovereign nation's property, territory away without their involvement. That's what these tariffs are about. So any notion that this is a government that you can work with, you can appeal to, you can humor and give the president a medal or their peace prize or whatever, that's ultimately going to solve things. I think what Carney did today was important. I think it put Canada into the conversation in a good way. I think it's going to attract Europeans who are looking for stability and favorable trading relations even more. And because Canada is so reliant on the US, the fact that we're going to start to stand up, I think, more than we have to this point, given Mr. Carney's tone, shows that we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. Now, to all of this, there could come some significant pain. But one thing that Mr. Carney mentioned is that this rules-based order has a lie buried within it since forever, which is the great powers ignore those rules when they've wanted to.
Yes.
And the softwood lumber industry in BC, where I live, has been constantly hammered by the US, and they lose at the international courts, and the Americans do it again and again. And there's more than a few British Columbians that say, what's the whole point of these trade deals and these treaties and these international courts where we're right and we win and we have an agreement, and they just, keep hitting us with tariffs to try to wipe out our industry, which they've been doing for 30 years. And as a parliamentarian, Lisa, we would get frustrated sometimes with our own government's inability to go to Washington and say, no, we're serious this time. Stop breaking the rules that we all agreed to. Stop punishing us. Stop hurting your friends. But Mr. Trump sees friendship as a weakness, I think, ultimately, and only seems to respect people when they stand up and push back. And that's what Mr. Carney's plea was today. Let's see if it's effective.
Yes, Lisa, the president tends to describe countries as competitors, customers, or suppliers, never really as partners. And what you're seeing with the prime minister today is like, I'll use the F-35 versus the Gripen argument that's happening inside the government. Sweden's probably never going to bully Canada. So maybe that's who you hedge your bets with on this. I don't know what the right choice is, but it is those middle powers that are never going to be the bully on the block that are going to look to work together, right? But that's a slow process that's not without its challenges.
And it's an expensive process, too. You can't deny the fact that the United States is an important customer of Canada. As I listen to the speech, I'm happy for the speech to happen. I think it makes a lot of sense. But as I said in the first round, I'm just worried about the ramifications of it and that Canadians are prepared. Like Nathan pointed to the pain that's going to come. Would I be surprised if tomorrow Donald Trump says, I'm ripping up USMCA CUSMA?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. What would that do to all of those small manufacturing companies in Canada that depend upon access to the United States? Well, it's going to decimate them. It's going to be a real problem. And that's the stuff that we have to think about. The moment is great. We stood up to the world. I think it's positive. It'll reflect well in history, but Canadians should know that there is more to words than just words, that actions do have consequences, and we are going in this direction. The Prime Minister's leading us there. This is his mandate. So we'll see how it all pans out. And obviously for the benefit, the best of the country, I hope it all works out for us. But it's scary times, quite frankly.
But Lisa, just before I get to Emily, like on that point, like you're there's no question you're right, that there is a risk to anything you say that is in opposition to the president, and he could blow up the economic partnership. But, at what has he not pushed the country to the red line, right?
Wasn't he going to do it anyways?
Well, maybe, right? But like the Greenland thing, the image today, like this feels like more than an infatuation, Lisa, with the desire to take that. He says he wants peace. It's a big piece of Denmark,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The question is not whether or not we take the risk, is when we take the risk, what's the right time to do it? And I'm going to go back to what I said before. I don't know whether or not Canadians fully understand the ramifications of the stances that we're taking geopolitically. I don't know whether or not the Europeans are going to have our backs when faced with the same situation with Donald Trump that we may be facing in the near future. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that is coming up that we're going to have to deal. First of all, we got to see what the president says tomorrow. Who knows what he's going to end up saying? But that's why I'm kind of a quandary, David. I mean, I'm not disappointed in the speech. Had to be said, but I'm cognizant of the risk. Is it the right time to make the speech? Do we put the line in the sand? And do Canadians fully understand what we're about to embark upon?
Emily, what's your sense on that? Do you think the country, it seems to me, is very much seized with the reality of what Canada is facing from the White House, but I guess it's a knock-on consequence of any of the actions you take and the counteractions that could come in response. What's your view on where things are with that?
I think to Lisa's point, that's exactly what the Prime Minister is trying to do, in the sense that he seems to be worried that if Europe is under attack, or if Canada is under attack, Europeans will be too busy fending for themselves to actually come to our aid. And so he's trying his best to sound as European as possible, essentially, is what he's been doing. And also even considering sending Canadian troops to Greenland and really solidify the fact that Canada is NATO, and that there is that alliance between Canada and Europe that stands and should still be standing without the United States, I think is what he's on a mission to try and accomplish right now. In terms of the blame and the ire from Donald Trump, I think we're past the point of saying we should not be provoking him. I don't think that Denmark provoked him in any way, or that Greenlanders provoked him in any way. They were just conveniently located on the map, is what is what happened. Maybe we can blame the Mercator projection as well. Probably Donald Trump doesn't even realize that Greenland is not as big as it looks on the map. That's basically what the blame is. So it's not about our own behavior. So I think that's what happened. And in terms of what might come tomorrow, I think that Donald Trump seems to be focused right now on poking fun and humiliating the UK Prime Minister, and certainly Emmanuel Macron as well, showing publicly some of their private text messages exchange as well with the NATO Secretary General. And so his attention right now seems to be focused on Europe. And really, at the end of the day, everything seems to lie on basically the American people, who do not stand to benefit anything from any of this. None of what Donald Trump seems to be obsessed with will lower the price of bread or eggs or basic necessity or make America great again in any shape or form for ordinary Americans. And so we just need to hope to God that at some point there is enough domestic trouble coming from his own base for Donald Trump to have to shift his eye of Sauron away from Canada and Europe. Look,
I quoted Thucydides. I've also made some Lord of the Rings references, like Gondor and Rohan are at war now. This is not good. This is a very nerdy discussion. But, you know, Vandana, the leaking of the text messages, right, just posting these things on social media speaks to the difficulty of everything here. And the text to the Prime Minister of Norway, you know, about not getting the peace prize. Anyway, but it's just, Canada now is being faced with the decision on whether or not to, I don't want to say deploy to Greenland, but kind of that's what it is, right? It's to participate in a military exercise with NATO. What do you weigh on that with what we've been talking about, the risk of provoking this guy even further?
I think it goes back whether it doesn't really matter if you provoke him or not. It's really based on his mood, what he's feeling. Even sharing those text messages, it's taking away what traditional diplomacy is, which is you have readouts and statements, but you also have behind the closed door conversations and personal connections that can help, you know, deal with the diplomacy and move things forward. But it doesn't work with this person. But to pick up on Lisa's point earlier, I think this is where I am comfortable with the fight. I'm comfortable with Canada standing up for our values and to being there. I think we also have to go to the Canadian people and help them, you know, help everyone understand, like, the speech today was great for Davos, but I, like Lisa, did not understand the Greek philosopher, nor could pronounce it. For the average person who is commuting to work, picking up their kids, working their shift, what does it mean for them? Because if you can get buy-in from everyone, I'm confident Canadians will support what's best for Canada and Canada's role in the world. But you have to explain if there's sacrifices and how it'll affect us and how it'll affect their day-to-day life when they're also still focused on affordability. Today, this is the topic, and we'll cover it, and I'm sure media across Canada will cover it. But when it comes down to the grassroots level, you know, can we make sure that people don't get tired of this and they understand the risks with it? And I do believe, though, that Canadians will be. And I think once they hear from the Prime Minister maybe a more simpler version of the speech, or having a tour or have a conversation about it, I think that's where his basis should go as to where Canada should go next.
I did, Nathan, make the suggestion to an advisor to the Prime Minister today. This would be a good conversation to have in Canada with Canadians on Canadian soil, maybe on a daily Canadian political show that will give you the time to have that conversation, because there is an explanation and you know, that ground level reality of this that needs to be talked about, and also the consequences of, do you deploy to Greenland, as is being asked. But the Prime Minister made clear in the speech, we covered many things. We stand firmly with Denmark, firmly with Greenland, firmly with NATO. We will live up to our NATO commitments. There's no ambiguity in a comment like that in the face of what the U.S. is doing.
No, but nor did we anticipate a NATO member going after another NATO member, I don't think.
No.
Like, that's the whole point of an alliance, which was put together across the North Atlantic to push back predominantly against Russian influence and incursion. Wouldn't a strategic alliance like that be the best idea, right? Like, if you didn't have NATO, you'd want to create it today. And we do have it, but it didn't anticipate this. I think for Canadians, most, I would imagine, have come to the conclusion that this president is not a reliable trading partner. He does not have our interests at heart. He is got a cruelty level within his administration I have never seen before, and is willing to do things that will be ultimately damaging to his own people if he feels like that's in his own self-interest financially, etc. So if Canadians have not come to that conclusion yet, it's going to be harder for Mr. Carney to come home and say, we're taking some very bold steps here. We're standing up and there's going to be consequence. We're going to have to pay a price for this. We're going to have to trade with people we haven't traded with before. We're going to have to invest. We're going to have to borrow money to invest, all of those things, because the alternative is to just keep getting punched in the face to the point where he looks at the Yukon and says, I want the Yukon next. And tell me who can imagine him coming up with that idea when someone shows him a map of the Yukon, right? And says, you should have this too. It's so close to Alaska. It's a hard moment. Lisa's right to worry about the consequences. I would be very curious what the Conservatives' response is going to be to this. Is there going to be a general unity around the right and the left and the center in Canada around this approach to the Americans, or is there going to be division? How does he keep the provinces together as he goes and extends trade, as we're seeing in China? Those are going to be things that matter domestically and important for Mr. Carney to be able to sustain this position.
No, Lisa, it is increasingly an age of imperfect options, right? There are just tough choices and tougher choices on the menu. Even going back to what Emily was talking about with this board of peace notion that Donald Trump is putting on the table with a $1 billion cover charge. And he's invited like Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban, and Lukashenko from Belarus to be on it, you know, in addition to Mark Carney and others. It kind of boggles. So what do we watch for with Trump in Davos tomorrow and over the course of the next couple of days with the European leaders meeting on Thursday? What are you watching for that would give us a sense of whether this is potentially on a tipping point towards a more negative trajectory?
He's going to lay down the law of what his perspective of the new world order is. And I think we've invited him to do that. And he may specifically put it out. To Nathan's point or question about maybe Mr. Trump will wake up one day and decide he wants Yukon. Mr. Trump's already decided he wants Alberta. And my great fear domestically is that they're going to agitate within our own borders to get some kind of mistake to happen, perhaps I should say, with respect to a referendum happening in Alberta in the near future. And I don't think we should lowball that. I think that is something that we have to take very seriously and think about the ramifications of that. I don't think Prime Minister Carney could have taken this speech today, but for the fact that he did the deals with the Chinese and with Qatar. I think he needed to do those to show to Canadians that there are alternative routes for trade, given that the bet is that the U.S. is going to make it more and more difficult for us to trade with them. So we're at the very beginning of the beginning. There's a lot of tough decisions coming, like FIFA, like Olympics, like it's just unending. We'll be on your show for a long time, David, talking about this.
Well, Emily, you're going to get the last word, but you know, the Alberta situation, 1 year ago today at the inauguration, the keepers of the algorithms were all sitting in the front row and paying a lot of the tab. And if there's ever a situation rife for misinformation and distortion on social media, it's a sovereignty referendum in Alberta or in Quebec or anywhere. And it's the thing I worry about the most in the short to medium term life of this particular country. So on that happy thought, I'll give the last word to you, Emily, to wrap it up.
Yeah, on the situation of Alberta, I think when it comes to influencing Canada, the first thing we need to watch for is basically people listening to Fox News and just the realm of influence that the American conservative, American Republicans have on a lot of Canadians on the right, especially in the prairies, but elsewhere as well, and the way it influences people to not even want to, you know, have a sort of Canadian MAGA movement. And it's not even it's not even theory. We've seen it with the Ottawa convoy. In some ways, that was very much inspired by January 6th. And so we need to be very careful for that. And it's really interesting on that note to witness the far right in Europe looking at Donald Trump and being more conciliatory to the center and other European leaders than they have ever been before. It's like the far right in Europe falling into the fold and finding some sort of common ground with liberal leaders such as Emmanuel Macron, because what they share together is anti-Trumpism. And so I hope that Canada is also not too far gone to be able to do the same. And I'm saying this because there is more of a risk because of the shared language and the border and the cultural proximity, especially for people in the English part of this country, to be just so familiar with the Americans. We don't realize we have that difference.
Yeah.
And so we need to be very, very extra careful with how ideas circulate, not just goods and money.
Yeah, and it was last year, J.D. Vance went to the Munich Security Conference and cheered on the Alternative for Germany, a right-wing party that is labeled as a national security risk in the country of Germany. So we'll see what happens at that coming up in a couple of weeks. Vandana Cotter, Lisa Wright, Nathan Cullen, Emily Nicola.